social, a social worker for children, the head of British Columbia's biggest labor union, and then the savior of a floundering land trust for protected wilderness and historic properties. At 77, Mr. Shields was stricken by a rare and incurable disease called amyloidosis, causing proteins to build up in his heart and painfully damage the nerves in his arms and legs. Mr. Shields had seen a friend die from a painful and disabling disease. He was terrified of facing a similar fate. He said, "One quality of life that's important to me is my dignity and sparing anxiety for my wife and daughter. Becoming debilitated and being tube fed was unacceptable to him. All of those painful and demeaning things," he said, "I considered beyond the threshold of how I would like to live." More than a year later, after the disease had progressed significantly, Mr. Shields entered hospice in a great deal of pain and too weak to leave his bed or maintain a conversation for more than 15 minutes. But he knew that he wanted to access Canada's medical assistance in dying process that had been legalized in 2016. Mr. Shields approached his doctor, who told him that he was eligible to access the provisions of the law. For Mr. Shields, having control over the terms of his death made him feel empowered over the disease rather than crippled by it. He believed that dying openly and without fear could be his final legacy. This powerful and heartwarming story weaves together Mr. Shields' use of the MAiD process with his decision to have a living wake to celebrate his life and say goodbye to loved ones before the time of his death. His doctor, Stephanie Green, described her role this way: "It's about choice. Give people good information and let them do what they think is best for their family." She's never understood doctors who say offering lethal medicine goes against their training. "I think people go into medicine because they want to help people," she said. "This is on the continuum of care of helping people." According to Dr. Green, most of her patients suffer more from psychological than from physical pain. Just being approved for a medical death can be therapeutic. For some, the knowledge that they can control their exit translates into more peaceful final days. I start with this story tonight because Mr. Shields' reasons for choosing MAiD are representative of many who choose to access this process, not only in Canada, of course, but in the United States. It brings into focus the people who have been enabled to access their state's MAiD process, or who, because there is not a law in their state, are left to face a very different death. As you may know, Canada, as well as some other countries, permit physicians to administer the MAiD cocktail by injection to eligible patients, but that step is not allowed anywhere in the United States. More on that a little later. A little background for context. How did we get to the point where medical aid in dying became a reality? During the 1980s and 90s, particularly before the development of antiretroviral drugs, people who were afflicted with HIV/AIDS were dying horrible, painful, and prolonged deaths. In order to alleviate the suffering of the dying, some communities developed a MAiD process outside of the legal system, where networks of friends would stockpile various medications and then provide the drugs to friends who became afflicted and were dying. In addition, in the last half of the 20th century, the avalanche of scientific advances has enabled doctors, hospitals, and drug companies to keep all of us alive longer. But with those longer lives, we see more and more people dying prolonged deaths with repeated or multiple artificial interventions. This has led to discussion in society, in the press, and among medical professionals about what it means for someone to retain quality of life when sick, and also what it means for them to experience quality in their death or dying, and who gets to make the decisions. And then we must give a nod to Dr. Kevorkian, the pathologist who was reviled by many, but revered by others. If you are too young to remember Dr. Kevorkian, during the 1990s, he used his own judgment and medical know-how to help people die after determining that they were suffering from terminal illnesses and requested his help. Dr. Kevorkian administered lethal injections to roughly 130 people before he was finally stopped through criminal conviction and a prison sentence. I remember being shocked and disturbed at how brazenly he advertised his activities and dared the legal system to come and get me. But for those of us supporting medical aid and dying, there is no question that the disturbance he created forced us to begin to look at and consider every person's choice at the end of life. By the way, digression here, I highly recommend the film portrayal of Dr. Kevorkian in HBO's You Don't Know Jack from 2010. It's reportedly an accurate portrayal of the man who was called Dr. Death, and it features a brilliant performance by Al Pacino in the leading role.
I never saw that, did you?
As the Death with Dignity, which is what it's called in some states, death and MAiD, the same for all intents and purposes. The movement gathered steam. It led to legalization through a successful ballot initiative in Oregon first in 1994, which coincidentally or not was where Dr. Kevorkian's first patient had been located. And you'll see it went from 1994 and there wasn't another law passed until 1998. So that's 14 years. And it may be, I mean, who knows, the movement was gathering steam, but nothing happened until the Supreme Court upheld the Oregon law in 2006. By 2010, there were 3 states where the practice was legal. Several others joined the movement between 2010 and 2020. As of today, there are 11 jurisdictions where MAiD has been legalized. The New Jersey MAiD permits an attending physician to write a prescription for medication that a qualified, terminally ill patient may self-ingest in order to hasten an inevitable death. What is well, let me just say this. Many people, roughly a third of all those who jump through the hoops and actually receive the medications, do not take it because they report that having the option, having those medications available, if and when they decide to take it, relieves their anxiety. By Googling New Jersey MAiD, you will find, you'll easily find the text of the law. So I wanted to try and unpack it a little bit and walk through it. A qualified terminally ill patient has to meet several requirements. The physical requirements are that they are suffering from a terminal illness. They are within 6 months of death. They are able to make both verbal and written requests of their healthcare provider. And they are able to self-ingest the drugs when they receive them. The next set of requirements have to do with mental capacity. The patient has to be capable of making the request. The request must be determined to be voluntary, and the decision to request the medications has to be an informed decision. We'll see in these next slides that the assessments, particularly, well, both physical and mental capacity, are carried out through medical exams, the provision of information to patients from doctors, from repeated reminders that the request for MAiD medication can be rescinded at any time, and through specifications about who can witness a written request for medications. I want to say emphatically, it is absolutely clear that there is no agent of any person, whether you are a healthcare proxy, a guardian, a conservator, that can invoke the provisions of the MAiD law on someone else's behalf. It has to be the person themselves who are asking to invoke the law and go through the process. The other thing that there's discussion about is whether or not you yourself can create an advance directive saying that if I become incapacitated at a certain time, I would like to invoke the New Jersey MAiD law. The answer to that is also no, no way, no how. You have to have capacity at the time you want to start the process of invoking the law. The final requirement is that you have to live in New Jersey. Because there are only 11 jurisdictions in the United States where this process is legal, people who are in states where it's not legal cannot come to New Jersey to take advantage of the law. Now you see questions and answers on the different sites about, well, can I just go there? Can I take a visit there in order to get the drugs and to see the doctors? You run into all kinds of practical difficulties if someone tried to do that. You have to establish residency, and the attending physician is actually required to check your residency through identification and so forth. So, if you met the requirements to come into New Jersey for a long enough period of time that you could get a driver's license, that might meet the test. But when you think about the population we're talking about, if somebody is terminally ill and within 6 months of death, making that kind of a move is probably not feasible in any event. If you are a qualified person under the law, then you are involved with an attending physician, a consulting physician, and perhaps a mental health professional. As the attending physician makes a determination through an examination and review of your medical records about whether you qualify. If there is any question in the attending physician's mind about your mental capacity in particular, he or she must refer you to a mental health provider to make that determination. The same thing goes for the consulting physician. Apparently, when they wrote the law, somebody was saying, well, maybe a regular, a physical doctor, an anatomical doctor may not be able to determine mental capacity. So the law does provide that a mental health professional can be consulted to make that determination and then bounce it back to the other doctors. So this is the process. You start with the attending doctor. After you've located one, if your own doctor isn't going to support you in the process, you make 2 verbal requests. The first request is made of the doctor when you consult, and the doctor then conducts the examination and determines your eligibility. And here in parentheses, it says MHP for mental health provider if they're concerned about your mental capacity. The attending physician must give you information about other options in addition to New Jersey MAiD: palliative care, hospice care, pain control, comfort care. So they have to let you know that there are options to invoking the statute. You then have to go through this same process with a consulting physician. You locate them, determine your eligibility, go to a mental health provider if there's a question about capacity. Then you go back to the attending physician because you have to make your second verbal request. And the law provides that the verbal requests must be made at least 15 days apart. So built into the law is this waiting period of a little more than 2 weeks. For people who are trying to access this process, there have been many complaints that this is too long. They are, after all, dying. They are on their deathbeds, and they want to invoke the process. And 2 weeks of additional suffering and waiting can be unbearable. It's my understanding that California Gavin Newsom just signed into law an amendment to California's law that reduced the 15-day waiting period to 48 hours. But I don't know of any movement afoot in New Jersey afoot in New Jersey to do the same. In addition to the verbal request, there is a written request that the patient must make. The patient must actually fill out a written form, him or herself. It reads as follows, the relevant portion. I have been fully informed of my diagnosis, prognosis, the nature of medication to be prescribed, and potential associated risks, the expected result and feasible alternatives, including concurrent or additional treatment opportunities, palliative care, comfort care, hospice care, and pain control. I request that my attending physician prescribe medication that I may self-administer to end my life in a humane and dignified manner, and to contact any pharmacist as necessary to fill the prescription. 2 witnesses must sign this request, and at least one of the witnesses cannot stand in any of the following relations to the person. They cannot be an actual relative. They cannot stand to inherit under the person's will. They cannot be owner operator of a healthcare facility where the person is getting treatment, and they cannot be an attending physician. The written request can be made at the time of the first verbal request. So you've got the 3 requests that are kind of, the first verbal can be made at the same time the written request can be made, but then you have to wait the 15 days for the second request to be made. Obviously, these descriptions about people who are excluded from being witnesses prevents coercion and ensures that the patient is making the request voluntarily. The prescription that the doctor actually writes cannot be made until the 2 verbal requests have been made. So the 15 days must elapse, and it cannot be made until 48 hours have elapsed since the written request. It is not capsules normally, as far as I know, everything I've read, it's always in liquid or powder form. And if it's in powder form, there are instructions for how to add liquid in order to be able to drink it. These are not, there are 3 compounds normally that are given to the patient, and there are 3 steps for taking them. One is taken an hour before the final one. The second one is taken a half an hour before the final one. And then the final compound contains the active ingredients that will precipitate death. There's a requirement that the patient must be able to self-ingest. And there is discussion about what that means. It is okay, the patient must be able to swallow if they're drinking the prescriptions. But it is okay for someone to assist by holding a cup or by holding a straw so that the patient can drink out of the straw. I have seen on different sites that certain doctors allow administration of the medication through a tube where the patient presses down on a lever to administer the medication because they're unable to swallow, whether it's because they're suffering from ALS or a similar neuromuscular, I'm not going to try and say that word, neuromuscular disease that prevents them from swallowing. And the final alternative that I've seen both of these 2 doctors say that they use is a rectal catheter. Neither of the doctors, however, practices in New Jersey. So I put possibly in parentheses because I can't tell you for sure that those methods are available in the state of New Jersey. The final note on ingestion. Physicians may not administer. And I dare say, even though in Canada and other countries where the MAiD process has been legalized, once you go through all these hoops and you've satisfied all the requirements, then you can make an appointment with a doctor to come over and give you an injection. And I have a feeling that the reason, that doesn't happen in the United States is due to our good friends, Dr. Kevorkian. He videotaped his administration of lethal injections to many of his patients, publicized them, and was even invited onto 60 Minutes, showing his administration of an injection to a patient. And I think that the memory of that was very disturbing to a lot of people and jarring. And so when the movement got to the point where this all became legal, that was a step that people in opposition just couldn't agree to. So it never made it in. It's not in any of the laws, not in anywhere in the United States can the physician administer the injection. There's a great deal of documentation that is required under the law. The patient request we reviewed. The doctors, both the attending and consulting doctors, must confirm in writing physical and mental eligibility. The attending must confirm residency. The attending doctor must document that he informed the patient of all the other options that are available. He or she must confirm that they told the patient they can withdraw their request. They have to confirm that the prescription was written. And then within 30 days after death, they must confirm the death. In New Jersey, the New Jersey statute went into effect August 1 of 2019. There were only 12 people who took advantage of the MAiD process in those 4 months, August, September, October, no, 5 months? 5 months of 2019. But of course, there weren't many people really who knew about it, and there probably weren't a whole lot of doctors who participated. In 2020, there were 33 people. The numbers, the state keeps these numbers. They're anonymous when you look up the records, but there are no published numbers yet for 2021. So it'll be interesting to see whether many more people took advantage of the process in 2021. The final piece of documentation, which is very important, is the death certificate. In the law in New Jersey, and I presume in other states, the death certificate will list the underlying terminal illness as the cause of death. It will not say suicide, and it will indicate that the patient died of a natural death. Many people have life insurance policies or annuities or some other type of insurance that gets triggered by their death. And because the death certificate will list the underlying terminal disease, none of those policies will be affected by that. The benefit from the policy will still be valid, won't be invalidated. So those are the main features of the law and process, but there are practical considerations. If someone is planning to take advantage of the MAiD process in New Jersey, it really is helpful to think ahead about when the medications will be ingested and whether you'd like to schedule visits with loved ones in advance or to have people present at the time the medications will be ingested so that you're not alone. You should decide where the medications will be taken, at home or in a facility. If you are about to enter a hospice facility, it's a good idea to find out if they'll support your decision to take advantage of the process. And who you'd like to be present. If you would like loved ones to be present at the time you're taking the drugs, or if you are going to announce to them that you're participating in this process and you want to see them ahead of time, it's good to have the difficult conversations in advance, right? It's also really helpful if you're not in a hospice facility that supports the decision. It's helpful to have a trained person present or to arrange for a trained person to talk to family members or friends who will be present to let them know what to expect. If people show up and you're going to be ingesting this cocktail of 3 drugs and things are starting to happen to your body and people don't know what to expect, they're going to freak out. There's going to be a lot of anxiety and chaos in the room. And it's not the way most people who are taking advantage of this process want their final moments to be, right? They should be calm and peaceful and surrounded by people who support what they're doing. So those sorts of circumstances are important to think about ahead of time. To review who is ineligible to access the process. If somebody can be suffering mightily, be in tremendous pain and suffering, but if they do not have a terminal disease and they are not within 6 months of death, they cannot access the process. They have to have both, a terminal disease and be within 6 months of death. They have to be able to self-ingest in the way that that's interpreted in New Jersey. And when we get to the resources page, there'll be places, if you have a specific question about the ingestion issue, you can get in touch with very knowledgeable people at these organizations who can answer that question. Mental capacity has to be there. And this is a real problem for people with advanced dementia or Alzheimer's. There's kind of a catch-22 because at the time you invoke the process, you have to have eligibility both physically and mentally. If you have early dementia or Alzheimer's, so that a doctor would consider you to be mentally capable of making the decision, you might not be within 6 months of death. And so you would be ruled ineligible for that reason. As your dementia or Alzheimer's progresses so that you are closer to death and you might be considered within the 6-month window, then mentally you might not be considered able to make the decision at that point. So you'd be boxed out. And there may be, I mean, I don't know, it progresses differently in everyone from what I understand. So there may be a window where you would be ruled eligible on both counts. But I think a lot of people will not be able to take advantage of it if that, unfortunately, is the disease that they're afflicted with at the end. Okay, the devil is in the details, folks, and this as in a lot of other things in life and in health and in death. One would think this is legal, right? So, you know, what's the big deal about finding a doctor? Well, up until 2019, the American Medical Association was formally opposed to the practice of medical aid in dying. So if the AMA, as the biggest medical association for doctors in the United States, is opposed to the practice, that says something to the doctors throughout the United States. You cannot, even when I was preparing this presentation, I Googled New Jersey MAiD doctors. Nothing comes up. It does not compute. There is no published list of doctors in the state of New Jersey who will support the MAiD process. It is done on a case-by-case basis. It is done when you speak to your doctor about whether or not they would be willing to support the process. And so I say, oh, let me say this. In 2019, the AMA finally changed their position. Their official position since June of 19 is that physicians can provide medical aid in dying, quote, according to the dictates of their conscience without violating their professional obligations. So they are officially telling doctors they can participate if they want, and obviously also that they can refrain if they want. Thank goodness for Dr. Lonnie Shavelson. In 2019, after doing a lot of research on the MAiD process, Dr. Shavelson decided that he was going to focus all his efforts on assisting patients through California's MAiD process. He realized that there were not many doctors who were open about assisting and that he thought many were nervous. He started a practice specifically for that purpose. That's the whole thing his practice did, was assisted people who wanted to take advantage of the process at the end of life. Ironically, he was hoping with being public about it that other doctors would follow his example and be willing to treat patients in that way. And what happened is everybody just said, oh, well, we know Dr. Shabelson's doing it, so we don't have to do it. So his intent was not fulfilled. And so he decided to shut down his practice. He shut down the practice, and what he did is he established the American Clinicians Academy for MAiD. And he's since organized conferences to educate and inspire other doctors to join him. It's the first national organization devoted solely to the clinical aspects of medical aid in dying. For the clinicians, it offers research, policy statements, guidelines, and continuing education. For patients, and this is what's important for all of us here today, it provides a patient-to-doctor referral network and connects you, for anyone considering MAiD, with experienced participating doctors throughout the country. It's a national referral system through this website. All right, so another detail, money. Are the expenses of the MAiD process covered? Well, in the United States, we live in the land of private insurance. And so like every other procedure you utilize, it's up to your own insurance company, whether they cover it, whether they don't cover it, whether they cover part of it, have deductibles, have your covered amount. So the same craziness that applies to all other procedures applies to New Jersey MAiD. There's not one yes or no answer. Medicare and Medicaid, being federally funded programs of insurance, do not cover expenses associated with the MAiD process. The takeaway really about this is just to plan, if it's something that you're at the point where you think you might want to take advantage of. The main thing, of course, is to talk to your own physician. If your regular doctor is somebody who would support the process, then you can breathe a sigh of relief. If your doctor won't participate, then before you're at the point of trying to invoke the law, it might be a good idea to find out another doctor who would, right? And also the conversations with family members is key. The point you're going to invoke the process and you're within 6 months of your demise, you may not be driving. You're going to need people to support you by getting you to doctor's appointments in order to really take advantage of the process and not frustrate it. All right, the resources available. There's a lot of information on the web. There's a lot of good information, but I'm going to again reiterate the American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid in Dying is a great resource for both clinicians and potential patients. Compassion and Choices and the Final Exit Network are top-notch nonprofits. They were both founded to support the right of terminal patients to control the circumstances of their death, and they provide a rich array of resources free of charge. They have articles, blogs, videos, and an ability to submit particular questions that someone will answer for you. The last resource listed here is the Garden State Threshold Choir, which offers an incredibly valuable service to those at end of life. Members use their voices to bring comfort and solace to people facing death, as well as to their families and caregivers. During COVID, the choir pivoted and began to record some of their songs so that the music could continue to provide comfort at bedside. Funeral Consumers Alliance member Judy Hahn is director of the choir, and she has generously offered to close our formal session tonight by sharing one of the choir's songs with us. After the song concludes, we will entertain questions. Judy? Archie or Clara, is Judy a co-host so that she can share her screen?
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I'm able to share screen yet. I'm not able to share screen. I can probably share sound.
Oh, do I, maybe, I'm gonna stop sharing,
Yeah, okay.
okay? Does that help?
Not yet. By the way, oh, maybe there. No, still not. Okay. If you go to the main website of Threshold Choir International, it's a simple website, thresholdchoir.org. As of today, one of our recordings is on the homepage. It's a beautiful song called You Are Not Alone. Oh, am I co-host now? Okay. Let me pull up one of our recordings. Okay.
Lay down your burden, let go. Lay down your burden, let go. You are pure love now. You are pure grace. Lay down your burden, let go. Lay down your burden, let go. Lay down your burden, let go. You are pure love now. You are pure grace. Lay down your burden, let go. Lay down your burden, let go. Lay down your burden, let go. You are pure love now. You are pure grace. Lay down your burden, let go.
Thank you for letting me share that, Mary.
Oh, thank you so much. That was so gorgeous. Thank you, Judy, and for letting us know that that resource is available for people who might want to utilize the MAiD process, right?
Yes, hopefully we will be going back to bedside in person. We go by invitation only through a hospice agent or through a personal family request to bedside of someone who's on the threshold, but we have also been able to do it virtually. So,
Great, that's great. Thank you so much.
okay.
Okay. I don't know if I'm sharing my screen, but all it says is thank you for being here and questions. Thank you all for attending the presentation. Feel free to drop off if you'd like, or stick around if you have a question or want to hear any questions. Archie, did anything come in that you want to?
No one has done anything other than a couple of very private messages. But if anyone who is listening in, please raise your questions now through the chat or raise your hand and we'll try and get around to you.
Archie, why don't you recognize people so we're both not doing it?
Right, I think Dr. Mary Jones has a question. Archie, can you unmute her?
Okay, I'm unmuted, I think.
Yes.
You said that there is a three-stage ingestion. The first an hour, the second a half an hour, and then the final. Are there any physical reactions that are to be anticipated? You know, voiding
Well,
or
I'll tell you, I'm going to refer you to the ACA MAiD website actually has a video reenactment of somebody doing this three-stage process, which is pretty interesting to watch. I'm, as I said, I'm scientifically challenged. All I know is the second cocktail, the one that's a half an hour before death or before the active cocktail, contains digoxin, which slows down the heart. I can't tell you what the first one does. I can't tell you what the third one does. It's compounds. It's different things. It's not just one drug. So other than that, I mean, once death occurs, then rigor mortis starts to set in, of course. But in the reenactment, the patient is lying down in a bed. And you can see she seems to fall asleep, and there's a nurse there who's checking her vitals and then lets the family members know that when she's gone. Other questions?
David Lewis. Can you unmute David Lewis? There we go.
Thank you. Mary, thank you for doing this. This is really wonderful. This revitalizing of the Funeral Alliance, Funeral Consumers Alliance. You did not cover anything concerning the cost of this process. Do you have any information on that? If it's not covered by insurance, having that information for the family would be, I think, extremely valuable.
Yeah, well, you know, because each person who's going through it is seeing their own doctors, you know, and their insurance may cover it, they may cover part of it. So, you know, there's no way for me to predict how much someone else's doctor would charge for an office visit in order to make the determination of whether they're eligible, right? I have heard in a presentation, there was one presentation that said that the drugs, the cocktail, normally cost between $350 and $600. That's for the prescription. Now, of course, some doctors who are supportive of this process are supportive at other times in our lives when we consult with them. They can code things in a certain way that helps with the insurance process, and they can code things in other ways that doesn't help with the insurance process, if you get my drift. And so if you have a cooperating physician, you know, you might find that you're out of pocket less than if you have somebody who's not paying attention to that.
Mary,
So I'm sorry, I can't give you a number other than that, David. Thanks.
Mary, Glenn has a question. Suppose one has ALS and cannot swallow or move arms. Would that person qualify? Glenn, I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
I'm here. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Mary.
It seems as though that I read one article and saw a presentation by another doctor. So there are two doctors in different states who have indicated that they used alternative ways to satisfy the self-ingestion requirement. And they either used tubes where a patient could depress a lever, or they used a rectal catheter.
Mhm.
And in some way, the patient was indicating that they wanted to take in the medications. Nobody can press the button for you, but if the patient is able to do one of those two things, even if they cannot swallow, those doctors seem to indicate that it satisfied the requirement. Now, neither of them practice in New Jersey, and I did not happen to see any resource that specifically mentioned these alternative methods of ingestion for New Jersey. I'm cautiously optimistic that it would be okay, but it would be something to check with one of those organizations listed on the resources page. ACA MAiD should be able to answer the question. Compassion for Choices has a lot of information about the process. So I think you'll be able to find the answer if you dig a little bit, just to make sure that it's available in this state.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking my question.
Sure. I have a question about whether the doctor must be in the same state as the patient. I am going to say that the doctor, yes, I would say the doctor does need to be in the same state as the patient, because the whole process is taking place in a state where the process is legal. If the doctor is in a different state, there'd be liability issues because it wouldn't be legal in the state where the doctor was.
Okay,
Right.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. Hi, Marilyn. Good to see you.
Good to be here and good to see you and everybody. Gee, this is nice participation. I wondered if you possibly could put up that last page of that you'd shared with us. It had the websites of Compassion and Choices and the choir
Yes.
and another one. And I couldn't write fast enough, but I'd like to have those websites available, please. I don't know if anybody else writes faster than I do, of course.
Clara will put that also on the Funeral Consumers Alliance
There we go.
webpage.
Oh, here, fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, final exit. Okay.
All right. I can't see the whole gallery when I'm sharing my screen, so I'm looking for more questions. And seeing none. Do I see a question? I do see a question. Yes. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thanks, Mary. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
have a little bizarre question. So in terms of, so it makes sense that the physician needs to be in the same state as the patient, but are there any consequences if people have, if they're, I think I don't remember if it's certified or they're able to practice in more than one state. Does it have any consequences in the state where it's illegal?
Okay, let me make sure I understand your question. So you're saying a doctor who's licensed to practice in more than one state? Well, if they are engaging in the process with a patient in a state where it's legal and the doctor is also licensed to practice in that state, there shouldn't be a problem. All the states have enacted laws about, certifying that there's no liability for doctors for participating in the process and that kind of thing. I mean, I can't imagine that there would be any issue there. Thank you.
Kelly has a question.
Okay.
We can find her fast enough. Clara, unmute her, please.
I'm unmuted.
Hi,
Hey, Mary. You know me.
I know you, except
I'm
I
in-
don't see you at the moment.
I
My
know,
gallery's a little.
I can't see it either, but I'm a nurse, and I guess the first 9 years of my practice, I saw people come uncontrollably into the world. And for the last 20 years, I've seen people leave the world uncontrollably. So this is a very particular topic, ma'am. It's very particular. What brings you to this topic on a personal level, on a personal experience? What's your expertise? What brings a person to this topic for you? I mean, on a personal note.
I shared at the beginning that article that I found deeply moving about, I don't know if you were here right at the beginning. And actually that article about John Shields led me both to a real interest in end-of-life issues, generally, all kinds of end-of-life issues, and also to celebrancy, because he had a celebrant present, he had a living wake, and I have since become that's how I became a certified life cycle celebrant. I became interested in end-of-life issues, particularly.
What more about your certified life cycle celebrant? What is that?
So I'm a non-religious officiant at ceremonies, typical ceremonies that we're used to hearing about: funerals, celebrations of life, weddings, and also any individualized ceremony that somebody would like to honor a milestone or transition in their life. We create customized, unique, one-of-a-kind celebrations, even when it's a moment that might seem to be something that's sad or depressing to some people. It's all part of the life process, right? From beginning to end.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
Glenn has another question about whether this will be, can you have a copy of the presentation? We are going to put it on the website, at least have the recording on the website. Almost everything except the first minute of Mary's introduction has been recorded.
Okay, so does that answer, Glenn, your question? I'm not sure that.
Oh, yes, yeah, it does. And thank you very much
Sure.
For that. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, I think that's it, right, Archie? Do you see anything else?
I've seen no, unless somebody has a hand up, I'm scrolling through. Let me know.
It's time to really wave your hands if you want to. Last chance, last call.
Sherry has her hand up.
Sherry, hi.
Unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Great presentation. Thank you. I wondered if MAiD comes into play or has any bearing on situations when people are on a respirator or receiving artificial nutrition and want to stop.
Well, it seems to me that there would be an initial, that it would add another step in the process. If somebody wanted to take advantage of MAiD and they were on artificial respiration or ventilation, right, that would have to be done first.
Right. I'm thinking of the person may not have been terminally ill, but now is in a situation where they're only alive because of artificial means, and they don't want to be a body in a bed forever kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. I don't, again, I'm going to say, I'm not a science person, and, it's possible that if the ventilator was unplugged, that would precipitate their demise, right, Cher?
That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I don't know that they would need to access the statute. I mean, if the ventilator was unplugged and they stayed alive, yeah, then they could go ahead with the process, or maybe they could initiate the request somehow while they were still on the artificial ventilation, so that the prescription was could be acquired more quickly and they wouldn't have to wait another 2 weeks, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Interesting question for somebody who understands how all this stuff fits together, really.
Mm.
But thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not able to give a more informed
No.
answer.
Yeah, I've asked around. I haven't gotten clarity, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so very much for being here. It was a pleasure to be with you. And I want to thank Funeral Consumers Alliance of Northern New Jersey for hosting, and the Cracker Jack Tech Team, Archie Palmer and Clara Jenkins, woo woo, for making this possible. And thank you all for your questions and your interest. See you next time.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Mary, well done as expected. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Archie. Thanks a lot.
You really are very clear. Your pacing is good, your voice quality, and your obvious intelligence and interest in the subject. Just they come through loud and clear.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, as I've said, I really enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed the research and I enjoyed preparing it. So thank you. Thank you very much. I know it's not so easy to navigate all this tech stuff. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
And who is it? What did that announcer used to say, the broadcaster? Good evening, and who is it? Walter Cronkite? What did he say? Over and out. Anyway, good night. Thanks, Archie.
Good night, all.
Good night, all. And to all a good night.